Now last week I was lucky enough to visit the new Yamaha off-road experience in Wales, and over the course of the day we got to ride a few different bikes, including the brand new 2022 Ténéré 700 World Raid. Now I've been super keen to try this one out ever since it was announced, and then fortunately we also had some standard T7s on hand. So it's a great opportunity to do a direct back-to-back comparison out on some awesome trails, and so in this video I'm going to go through the details of each and tell you which one I'd pick if it were my money. But before we get started, a massive thanks to Ridge Wallets for sponsoring this video. When I'm out on the bike, I like to carry as little as possible, so their wallets are absolutely ideal. They take up to 12 cards and you can store some cash on the back with the clip, but the whole thing isn't much bigger than the cards themselves. Plus, they've got loads of awesome designs and colors, a lifetime warranty, and their RFID blocking, which means nobody can scan your contactless cards. And so it's an awesome product, perfect for bikers, and I've been using this one, the matte black titanium, for a few weeks. Absolutely love it, and I've also been trying out their more bling looking carbon version. And they've even given me a discount code for my viewers down in the description below, so once again a massive thanks to Ridge Wallets. Now first up, a quick refresher on the T7 specs, which provides the base upon which they've built the new World Raid. At the heart of it, we've got their CP2 parallel twin, which is a plucky little engine that they use across a lot of different styles of bike in their middleweight lineups. Peak power isn't massive, but I don't think it necessarily matters in this style of bike. What does matter is a usable spread of torque and a thoroughly enjoyable feel and character and sound. There are no throttle modes or advanced rider aids really, so it's just a good, simple, reliable engine that's well suited to do on and off road riding alike. As for the chassis, again, it's nothing particularly fancy, but it's just well designed for exactly what this bike is intended for. It's got a steel frame with a double cradle to add a little more protection for the engine, and it sits nice and tall with 240mm of ground clearance. At the front, you've got a 43mm adjustable upside down fork with 210mm of travel. There's 200 at the rear on the monoshock too, and that's also adjustable. You've also got proper off-road wheel sizes, so a 21-inch front, 18 at the rear. Both of them are spoked, and as standard they're shod with Pirelli's Scorpion rally tyres, which I've found to be pretty decent all-rounders. Brakes are from Brembo with a pair of 2-pot calipers at the front on a 282mm disc, a single caliper at the rear on a 245, but then really in terms of specs that's about it. There is switchable ABS and it does get an LCD rally style dash, but otherwise it's super simple, and that's exactly what people love about it. It's a middleweight adventure bike that actually feels like a big dirt bike, and there aren't too many gizmos that might go wrong if you're on a long remote tour. So what's the difference with the new World Raid model? Well, it takes that simple starting point and then adds a little bit of tech and spec in order to boost its long range and off-road capabilities. First up, the tank. It's a big increase in capacity, so 16 up to 23 litres, and they've done that by using 2 cells that hang down on either side of the bike. You've also got 2 filler caps, but there's no need to switch between the tanks when one runs out or anything. There's a link pipe between the two and then a single fuel pump in the bottom of one of them. What this split design does allow them to do though is position the 2 cells lower, and so that means that the center of gravity remains pretty similar to the standard bike despite holding more fuel and therefore more weight. Now the lowness has also allowed them to fit this longer bench seat, which they say allows the rider to move more freely around the bike, and they've also employed 2 types of covering, so a more grippy one in the middle and then something more slippery at the edges, again to help with rider mobility. Now to go along with that extra range, they fitted a bigger windscreen, so it sits about 15mm taller, and combined with the removable deflectors at the sides, it just gives it a little bit more protection from the wind when you're touring and doing motorway work. Suspension also gets a boost with better, lighter internals, full adjustability and more travel. So 230mm on the fork, 220mm on the shock, and as a result you get 15mm more ground clearance. Now you also get an Öhlins steering damper to add a little bit more control to the front end, and it's adjustable through I think 14 clicks, which you can do easily while you're on the move. Tech-wise, there's a new TFT dash, so you get a few new layouts for different riding scenarios. There's also a bit of phone connectivity with incoming calls and messages displayed on the dash, and you can also access error codes while you're out on the road, but there are no extra riding modes or anything fancy that you need to manage through the dash. There's just one additional ABS setting, so as well as on and off, you now get a kind of halfway mode which disables the rear ABS for fat skids, but the front is still on for a little bit of reassurance. Now they've also redesigned the airbox, so it now gets a forward-facing intake, and that means that you don't get dust and debris chucked in there from the rear wheel. And I think that rounds off all the changes, but clearly there are some obvious reasons to go for the World Raid. Firstly, the range. I mean, that extra 7 litres of tank capacity pushes the total range up to an estimated 311 miles. That's almost 100 more than the standard bike, so if you're someone who likes to tour on a bike like this, or if you often ride in remote locations where fuel fill-ups are few and far between, then clearly this is the one to go for. Unfortunately, I can't really speak for how much it affects the balance of the bikes, because the standard bikes on the off-road day were almost full of fuel, whereas the World Raids that we were riding on only seemed to have a bar or two. I don't think Yamaha did it on purpose, but it did make it a little bit difficult to evaluate the difference between the two, but still it felt super manageable, not really any different to the regular T7. And also, if you were going like local trail riding, you probably wouldn't completely fill it up anyway. Second up, it's the suspension. I think for me, this is one of the main reasons to go for the World Raid. It's a complete revelation. Not just the extra travel, because we weren't really bottoming the bikes out on these relatively accessible trails, but I think it's just that extra suppleness and refinement and the quality of the components that just meant it felt like night and day. The World Raid feels super cushy even on pretty rough surfaces. It seems to hug the surface and give you grip, and then when you jump directly onto the standard bike, which is still brilliant off-road, but it just felt firmer and a little more crashy, as you'd expect with lower spec equipment. But yeah, like I say, this is the standout point for me on the World Raid. Also, call me vain, but the World Raid is definitely a more impressive bike to look at. I think it's the dual tank, the steering damper, the new dash that all give it a proper cool rally look in the cockpit. And then you've got the graphics and stuff, the taller stands, the new seat design, and for me it just looks the absolute nuts. On top of that, they've given it some glass fiber composite radiator shrouds. There's a new 3-piece engine guard, a new radiator grille, wider off-road bias foot pegs, and so generally it's just better spec'd and feels a bit more robust. So where does that leave the standard T7? Is it just dead in the water now? Well, I'd say not. For me, there are still a good few reasons for it. Firstly, if you're a shorter rider but you want a Ténéré, then this is by far and away the better choice. It's still a tall bike at 875mm, but also there's a low seat accessory. That takes off another 20mm, it costs about 160 quid, and so that would bring it down to 855mm, which is still fairly tall, but not ridiculous. The World Raid, on the other hand, though, it sits extra tall because of that longer travel suspension, so it's up at 890mm. I wouldn't let it totally put you off. I'm 5'9" and I found it pretty manageable, but then again, I'm fairly used to riding tall adventure bikes. But if you're unsure, then get yourself down to a dealer and have a sit on it, and if it still feels way too tall, then the standard bike with the low seat is 35mm lower, which is a massive difference. Another factor would be the weight. So you've got more stuff on the World Raid, it's going to be heavier, plus it's carrying more fuel. Full to the brim, it'll be 220 kilograms wet, which, look, it's not that bad for an adventure bike, but it's still 16 kilograms more than the standard T7, which is a substantial difference. Again, if you're on the short side and not that comfortable with tall bikes, then the lighter bike is going to feel more manageable. And then, of course, you've got the price. It's almost $2,000 more for the World Raid. Having ridden them back to back, I do think that the World Raid is worth 2 grand more. If you look at what it costs you to do the suspension yourself, to add the Öhlins damper, to fit a long range tank, you know, for me it's great value for money. But if you prefer the dimensions of the standard bike, then it just makes sense to save a bit of cash. The TFT dash is a nice upgrade as well visually, but it is a bit superficial because you don't have loads of extra modes and settings and whatnot to manage. The phone connectivity stuff is pretty limited, and so it wouldn't really be a deciding factor for me. That said, if it was my money, purely out of these two bikes, I think I'd have to go for the World Raid. The suspension alone is worth it, and if you don't believe me, I think the off-road experience in Wales are getting some on their fleet. So if you want to ride them properly back to back like I did, then get yourself over there and give it a try. It's a proper good day out. They've got brilliant bikes, great trails, amazing new facilities, and some of the best instructors in the business. The only thing I will say with the World Raid is that when you start comparing that price to the competition outside of the Yamaha lineup, you can actually get quite a bit more spec and tech for your cash. It costs more than an 890 Adventure, for example. But I think if you're predominantly riding off-road, then it's pretty hard to beat. I don't think I've ever had this much fun riding an adventure bike in the dirt. As always though, I'd love to know which bike you'd pick down in the comments below. And if you're new here and you want to see more videos like this, hit subscribe and I'll catch you in the next one.